What's good, my boy? It's been a while since I came on here and made any sort of video, but I was sitting over there doing a little bit of reading, and I had some thoughts in my head that I just couldn't get rid of, and I decided, well, why don't I just get on here and just yap about it for a little bit? So, the main thought was I'm in this studio that I used to make all my videos in and spend a lot of time in making music, right? But I haven't really been making any music in it whatsoever, or really spending much time other than to just come in here in the morning because it's insulated and soundproof, so I can just get in here and have absolute quiet to read. But I've just been absolutely absorbed and gracefully brought into the Christian faith, if you will, mainly through the root of Catholicism. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. But I really wanted to discuss the dynamic between all these different interests that I used to come on here and talk about, from painting to building to making music and all writing, all in between. And that dynamic between what I'd conceived Christianity as in the past is kind of like this shallow thing. It's far from that, I will say. But really, I feel like it's the most needed thing now, as it ever has been. The amount of people lost, the amount of nihilism that plagues my generation, the amount of people making absurd, crazy ethical choices to their bodies, doing all these things. I'm not going to necessarily get into the politics because they are endless in themselves. But all of these different crazy things going on, you have, well, I won't even touch on that. Just crazy stuff. We all know about it. And to what I see, now I'm kind of sucked into this like Catholic Christian rabbit hole right now online. And sucked isn't a good word. I liked how I put it earlier. Gracefully brought in and just kind of surrounded by all of this stuff. And for my generation, this is a common thing with different things. Now, say whenever I was into the music, all my consumptions, my reading, my stuff I watched online, the figures that I listened to for guidance and advice, most of it was music related. When I was into painting, same thing applied. When I was into building, doing blue collar stuff, same thing applied. We get into these, what some refer to as echo chambers. And that's a hard word to use because I don't see, a lot of the time it has a negative connotation. For me in the Catholic faith, and through a lot of things that are academic or require a lot of reading and stuff, it can kind of be a good thing because it allows us in this modern day to quickly and very efficiently sift through all sorts of information to come to a good truth and a good consensus of it as a whole very quickly, compared to in the past, even 30 years ago before the internet, where you would just have to sift through hundreds of books if you wanted to attain this knowledge. You would have to spend decades of your life to get what can be 10 YouTube videos, because you would have to source through so much resource and reference material and blah, 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 blah. But since I'm in this echo chamber, I mention this for this reason. I am at now I don't want to make this statement by saying that I'm at some level of knowledge or anything like that, or I'm very green to the Catholic faith. I'm a catechumen right now, which is, I didn't even know that word 4 months ago, but it's where you enter in some of these older churches, Eastern Orthodox, stuff like that. You enter into catechesis, which is the learning about the faith. And the main point I want to make in this video is how it is so much fuller than any of these hobbies, passions, crafts, any of these things that I was interested in before. And don't get me wrong, I'm still going to pursue them. I'm still going to practice them. But overall, what I had conceived of and built up in my mind in the past as Christianity, as I want to stick with Christianity because I feel that a lot of the other ones are not necessarily true. I'm not a perennialist, which basically, if you don't know what that word means, it basically means that you kind of find good in all. I'm very much a Roman Catholic, and I appreciate some of the Eastern Orthodox stuff like that. But for the most part, I'm not one of these people that are like, oh man, there's good in all these things. Oh, let's take a little bit from the Muslims and put it in the soup. Let's take a little bit from this. There's a little side tangents in itself, but I believe in the one true faith, the one true apostolic church. But to teeter back on that point that I made, so much fuller and so much, the depths are so much deeper than any of these hobbies. I have to explain part of my journey to this faith. If you go back and look at my channel, now I went insane because I got into all this esoteric Kabbalah stuff like in around November, so I went literally insane, went to a mental hospital, my boy. But if you go back, and I deleted like over 100 videos during this period, but if you go back before that, don't worry, I'll touch on that later in the video, so you're not just like, oh, what the fuck, I'm not going to listen to some insane person. I'll touch on that later. But to go back, and you see some of my videos, a lot of the ones that are still up hold this connotation. I would go into these passions, I would go into music and such, not necessarily specifics of it, like a specific instrument or a specific idea, music theory, or a specific style, but necessarily in all of these things, I would go into this broad array of how beautiful this craft is. You have so much knowledge to learn in music theory. You have the mixing and mastering aspect of it, where it's such a craft in itself, and there's so much depth in that, and all the stuff you can learn, and the technology that there is, and there's old and there's new, and there's blah blah blah, the different instruments, the keyboards, the synthesizers, the guitars, the pianos, the drums. I was interested in it all in this wide array. Then there's consuming the music and learning from the others, all the genres. Then you even go past, then you have, we can combine listening and making with sampling, and it was just such a beautiful thing to me. As someone in the past, most of my teenage years, I've said this many times on this channel, I played World of Warcraft, and I basically hit a bong 24/7 in my room when I wasn't going to school, and most of my friends that I grew up with did a lot to the same. We just kind of like to chill, if you will. Didn't really see much purpose in anything else besides what our parents would kind of try to steer us towards. But I discovered purpose, if you will, in a sense. I got into all this like self-improvement stuff, which now looking back is like incredibly shallow compared to the real improvement that you can have. But it was an inkling of something to spend my time on, to view this world as not just as the nihilists view it, as a game that you can play that will inevitably be deleted and is for nothing. I got into some of these at this time. I got into like these German philosophers, where they would say things like nothing matters, blah blah blah, it'd be better to just be dead, just crazy stuff. But I discovered something. I discovered the beauty of creation. I would get into painting, in the depths of that. All the history of all the paintings, how it developed, the thousands of different styles of painting, all the utensils you can use to make a painting, the people, all the different ways you can educate and learn and blah, 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 is just amazing to me. The depths of these crafts and hobbies. And this was really my first inkling into Christianity, or rather I'll say something creating us, if you will. We'll steer it towards that. Then I got into building stuff, and I live here with my grandfather, and he has a giant shop, with woodworking and metalworking, and I spent hours upon hours organizing it and cleaning it up and doing all this stuff, getting it ready. I documented some of it on this channel. And I work construction, so I would get to hone my skills with a mentor and build these beautiful structures with really expensive materials and do all these different things. And then I would get to build and hone my craft on things that I was interested in, and just the depths of that. You have the architecture aspect of it. You have the craft aspect. There's just so many things within just those little hobbies, each one of them, that I was very interested in, talked ad nauseum about on this channel. So you have all that. And then sometime last year, in the middle of the year, 2024, I started coming to this revelation. These things are so beautiful and so in depth. And at the time, the stuff I was consuming in terms of like motivation, education, was, for music, it was people like Rick Rubin, and I would watch hundreds and listen to, while I was working, hundreds of these different musician interviews about their process and their craft. It was a lot of new age stuff. I would listen to some esoteric mumbo jumbo stuff about this and blah 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 and all this weird stuff. Then I would go into the building and see all these people who did all these different crazy things in the past with building and woodworking. And then I would painting, listening to these painters. But the main thing I get looking back on all of it was, a lot of it was just very esoteric and just kind of nonsense. It was just, they would talk about how fun it is, how they would paint it in like this almost erotic picture, the artist and his craft. And then at the very end, they would start talking about how these ideas come to us. And that was my first real attachment to something mystical, something spiritual, if you will. But it was very vague looking back. It was very, we get these ideas and we don't really know where they come from, and isn't that beautiful, isn't that amazing, and blah, 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 blah. Little did I know, you start reading the Bible and you start learning about the Holy Spirit and how He inspired these people in the same way that all these artists don't understand their inspirations, and that's a little thing in itself. But I was hooked, if you will. And then I just started to, I was still kind of going up and down in these like nihilistic phase, but then I kind of just slipped completely out of it, had my head above the clouds, and just saw the beauty of our ability to do all of these things. And it made me think, there's got to be some sort of a creator. And if there's a creator, because we've got to be mimicking something here. It's so unexplained, all these miraculous creations and abilities to create in depth of human creativity, whether it be in film or writing or just all these ideas. And then that was when I started to 100% believe in God. Not necessarily the Christian God, but just something divine, a creator. And I made a video on my channel. The last videos, this is funny enough, when I was psychotic deleting all my videos, I didn't really pay attention to ones I deleted. I would just like highlight a whole page at a time, hit delete forever, highlight a whole page. And the ones that somehow survived that, which I don't know how they didn't get deleted, were the last like 4. The first one was whenever I came to this revelation, and I made a video talking about how beautiful all this stuff is and how beautiful it all is. And then the next couple, I started chewing and wrestling with the idea of Christianity. Now, the atheists would say this is because I'm a cultural Christian and all this stuff is just kind of normal to me. But oh boy, I was very much weighing other options, if you will. And along that way, I hit many walls in my journey of faith, and I'm still building it to this day. At this time, the way I would describe it is it was like I was building a wall, and I would come across things because I was still very much interested in the esoteric stuff. Now, like 80% of it I find just nonsense and just kind of boring, if you will. There's still some good aspects and perspectives within it, as long as you don't adopt, if you're going to be a Catholic, as long as you don't adopt these ideologies and go into the realm of like divination or something like that, where you're like a wizard or a witch. That's besides the point. But I would still dabble in these domains, and there'd be something, because my faith was so green, and I had such a lack of knowledge, and this is where we're going to teeter the next topic. I had such a lack of knowledge that my faith was shook by very small, ignorant things. Like I would discover some esoteric thing trying to prove against Christianity, or talk about some wild theory like Jesus' bones, or Mary and like literally Dan Brown, Da Vinci Code level stuff. And there was this one guy who would talk about symbolism. I was super big into symbolism right before my psychosis. And I would like watch these things where it's like, Santa Claus goes up and down the chimney, and Jesus went down to Egypt and back up. This represents your what was the theories? It was all about the pineal gland. I was so attached to that aspect, all these different conspiracies, which are very easily disproven with enough research, which is the main thing I want to iterate. I would hit these walls. It was like a maze with not really an end, just you and a sledgehammer, and you have to knock down these walls and know where to hit it. And what I realized is, if you spend enough time researching this stuff, most of this stuff can be disproven and has a very concrete structure within Christianity that makes it make sense. Literally, almost all of it. You have a hard time with the Old Testament and all the brutality in it. I'm not going to get into apologetics trying to explain this stuff here, but there is this stuff out there if you want to look, and it's easier now than ever. How do babies have cancer and all this stuff? There are explanations that are very in-depth about this. I mean, on and on and on. So I would hit these walls and stuff like that, and then I'd go through them. One of my first was like, I was into like a lot of these evangelical Christians, where they would talk about how science and Christianity go hand in hand, and that really blossomed my faith. Now, and a lot of my deleted videos portrayed this. A lot of science I feel is kind of stupid. If you get into like the true idea of it, like say you got this coffee cup right here, most science only deals with like the motion of this object, up, down, left, right, the sensory perceptions of this object. It only really goes. So then once you start researching into like the metaphysics and all of that, which is complicated, I'm not going to get into it, but you start attributing those complexities and finding theologians who talk about that level of stuff, it plants roots in the Christian faith that have been planted there for thousands of years, that are so deep that it is deeper than any of these material interests that we could have. But what I find today with people my age is you get like TikTok videos, 1-minute videos, even less than that try to disprove Christian faith or this or that. And they do a good job at persuading people, not because what they're saying is true, but just because of the general lack of information in this religion. Like such a lack of information, and it comes, I believe, from our education. Like you look back and you see certain types of education. Now this is a slippery slope. This is a seesaw teetering, if you will, because more people know how to read than ever. But the complexity of the material they're reading is nowhere near what the average person who went to college was reading like 100 years ago. So it is a weird thing. I have hope maybe it'll balance itself out. After a while, we'll start appreciating these older things like the classics and great works. But we get educated through TikTok, and the usefulness of our education in the school systems literally stop after we learn how to read and do math and simple things like that. It's just kind of nonsense, and we don't get to pick and choose what we spend our time on, so people get completely uninterested in school like I did, and you just veg out smoking weed all day, not giving a damn about anything. But by the grace of God, I've been allowed to come back to something more grounded, something more meaningful than just materialistic pursuits. Now, I'm not a monk. This is where some of the esoteric stuff I was researching really I enjoyed, and I still maintain with me. But in the esoteric space, there's this idea of like archetypes, right? And I feel like now also in the Christian space, most young men are getting pulled in this archetype of like the monk, the monastic, wanting to just like walk around all day talking about the Bible and not really do much in the real world. And a lot of it, to an extent, from what I've read and seen, one thing about the Catholic faith is it's not just open this up and interpret what you want. You have thousands of years of church history ever since 500 or since the 6th century, around then. You have like 1500 years of interpreting this, where they have almost a concrete interpretation, and it's not like the Protestants where you have 50,000 interpretations and all sorts of things and pick and choose and blah blah blah. It's very strict, rigorous, and provides a very good structure to your life. So that's a little side tangent in itself. But what I found pretty much is that if you just go off of like your general interpretation, because I started reading this in January, and I'm basically all the way through the epistles, getting to the what they call the Catholic epistles in the back, which are after Paul's letters to the churches. So I've pretty much read most of the whole thing and have an understanding, which will be a lifelong journey for me. But I have a general understanding of the stories and how it kind of goes. But I found a lot of things that if you just interpret this off of first read, it does kind of seem like it's kind of pointing you towards a monastic life. Be a monk, be a that type of thing. But in this, going back to this, the archetype thing, we also have the archetype of the knight, which the knight is someone who they still are grounded in like things like faith, and you can just ingest and learn and be very knowledgeable, but they go out into the world and they do things. They learn interests. It's a balance. See, whenever you get so much in this when you get so much in this monastic life. Now, I'm not calling monks things for this because I have a lot of respect. I am a Catholic. We have brothers and monks and stuff like that, as well as Orthodox and all that. And I appreciate and I see the merit in that. But as a layman, where you're, especially when you're green to this, I feel it teeters a lot on like a Gnostic ideal of this world being very bad and only focusing on the world to come. But if you really look at like the Catholic interpretation of the Bible, the message is very much we have to teach it to others. And in a world, in a society like today, it's not going to be taught entirely. I want to say entirely, they can, but it's not going to entirely be taught by just being a monk, or that's just what people are going to associate the faith with. But if you actually have experience in different domains, you have the ability to go out and resonate with people in different ways. I feel like nowadays that's kind of what's going to teeter people towards the faith, is things like some people are doing it with politics, or they're very knowledgeable about like geopolitics. Jay Dyer would be an example of this, where they kind of explain all of these different things and political agendas and stuff, and then steer it all towards the faith. That is a perfect example of what I would consider, not trying to be cringe or gay or anything, or ride meat or nothing like that, but as a knight archetype, where you're not just like a little monk, You're not just like solely focused on your spiritual life and you and God, but you want to be an apostle. You want to find ways to relate with other people to steer them towards the faith. So that's one thing. I know that was a whole tangent in itself, but it just goes to show one aspect of the depths of the Christian faith. And then you get into the apologetics. This was one of the biggest common misconceptions for me. I viewed Christianity as all Christianity being evangelical Christians. My first exposure to the Catholic faith, if you will, was through one of my uncles who is a deacon. We're not very close. We don't speak or anything like that. But I moved to this place right next to where he lived to get closer to the other family. And he invited me one day to come to the church. And within the Catholic Church, you do have division. You have trad Catholics who, that's a whole thing to explain itself. You have the radical Catholics. You have sedevacantists. You have the generic, unknowledgeable about Scripture Catholics who really only focus on tradition. You have the mom and the dad Catholics. You have all these, not what I would necessarily classify as like stark divisions, but you, as much as like a Protestant, but you do have this thing within it between the liturgy, which is the most important thing, besides, I don't know, I'm still green, so I don't want to make any determining statements or try to teach anybody the faith on here. I'm just a catechumen. But you have this division between the liturgy, which is our Mass, where we come together on Sundays or multiple days during the week to celebrate the Eucharist, Christ, literally the blood and in the flesh of Christ coming into the Eucharist in a literal way. That's what we believe as Catholics. But you have what they call a Novus Ordo and a traditional Latin Mass. Now, the new Mass, or Novus Ordo, is basically, it was like around in the 60s when they kind of started this to change the Mass and allow for these things. Now, there's lots of stuff that happened within that. But my uncle was one of these people where they practiced that. The Latin Mass is more rare to find. You have different groups like the, I think it's the SSXP, or no, it's the SSPX, something like that, and the FSP, which are these two different groups that hold the Latin Mass, if you will. And then you have the Novus, and it's very traditional, like they speak in Latin Mass. They do not face towards you. It's all towards the altar. It's supposed to be like a direct, just worshiping and praising of God and all sorts of things. I really don't want to get into the details with it because I'm trying to make this beginner friendly. Then you have the new Mass, which is in a lot of churches very reminiscent of a Protestant practice. Okay, you have the priest facing towards you. You have it in English. You have a lot of participation from the I don't really know the terminology you would use, from the people attending it. And this was my experience with my uncle, who is a deacon. He brought me there, and they were playing guitars, and it's kind of very kumbaya-like. And I wasn't even able to really understand or focus on it wasn't explained to me fully, focus on the sacrifice on the altar or any of that. I wasn't able to grasp or even understand. I was come from a Protestant background in the churches I've attended in the past, so I was mainly just focusing on the guitar and the music, thinking that's what my focus should be on. That's what most Protestants and Baptists do, is it's focused on your vocal worship to God through the music, at least to do service to them. That's what I believe it is. So I didn't really understand, and every once in a while I would look over and see what was going on over here, and the bowing and all of this, and again, it wasn't explained to me, but it was very reminiscent of the Protestant church, so I didn't understand it. I didn't really care about it afterwards, and it was kind of just like blah. Since then, I've found a church that does practice the new mass near me that I go to, and have gotten into the community, and that's one aspect about it that is very good in terms of the church that I would encourage people in my age to go for. But it was very, I don't want to upset the traditional Catholics, but it was a very holy mass. It felt very reverent and very, the focus wasn't just on the music. They don't use guitars and instruments here. It's the priest has a super thick Spanish accent, so it even almost feels sometimes like he's speaking a foreign language. But it's just a lot more aiming towards the traditional, if you will. So I would encourage people to kind of experiment with that. But to get back on the main message, a lot of people are just very, I would just go as far as to say ignorant about a lot of this. I mean, a lot of people don't know. I didn't even know I didn't know anything about it, like, at all. And whenever you're only exposed to certain evangelicals, or nowadays, this is what people do. And I know I'm kind of being a hypocrite here, but I would hope to think not as much as I imagine myself. But if you get into like the newer Protestant evangelical space, you have people that just find the faith, and they just start getting so deep into the theology, and it gets really cringy and dilutes it, if you will. They'll start reading verses out on here like they're a pastor. They could be like a couple months in, and like interpretations that are based like not at all in the church fathers or anything like that. Or even, it even does a disservice to most Protestant denominations' belief whenever they do this stuff. And it kind of just like pushes people away and alienates them. You have certain people like trying to like promote homosexuality and like all this different stuff within the faith, and abortion, using it. You just have a lot of people who are very unknowledgeable about it in general. Very unknowledgeable about Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy, that claim to be Christians but don't care about their heritage or about the traditions whatsoever. They make these bold claims, and they all hide behind the idea that they're doing it in the name of God, when in reality, it's all pride. When you really look at it, it's all them thinking that, especially when you get into stuff like the prosperity gospel and all of those. That was my only exposure to Christianity as a kid, was through like mega churches. Like the Joel Osteen's church was like 20 minutes down the road from the church I went to, and I went to one that was almost as big as his, like literally auditorium level with like opera seating up at the top and everything, and it's just like kind of crazy when you think about it. But a lot of people who are new in the faith do this thing. And this is the sad thing to me. I have not made a video in like 4 months for this reason, because I feel like I'm still so green in this vast sea of just infinite knowledge when it comes to, not just knowledge, but infinite divine teaching that we are given by the grace of God. And this beautiful church that has been instituted for us, that I feel it's a disservice to come on here and act like that. I even feel weird using big words and stuff like that. It's even almost just like kind of makes me feel icky. But I've just been in my head telling myself that I need to come on here and make a video, because it is such a good outlet to just get on here and just be able to ramble these things off, and it's sometimes easier than jotting them down in a journal. But this is just a disturbing thing, where it really dilutes the faith. Whenever you have people on here who couldn't defend the faith against the most, they can't defend it against any atheist. They can't even defend it against their own family members. Like I'm green enough where if someone in my family, yes, I've consumed hundreds of hours of content trying to educate myself, trying to learn. And even I, whenever someone will ask me a simple question, have a hard time giving a true answer that they're satisfied with. And not to brag or anything, I know how much effort I've put into trying to educate myself on this. And to see people who are just coming into the church acting like they've figured the whole thing out just because they understand the meaning of the lamb and the sacrifice and the beauty and significance of the resurrection. I don't know. It just kind of irks me in a way. It kind of, again, does sadden me because you see so many people out there who are lost and who could be guided to truth and fullness within the faith, which I believe that's what the Catholic Church is. You have the truth, but then you also have the fullness of the faith within these traditions, within these just teachings. Like, I got into a little bit in the beginning Protestantism, mainly with like, what's his name? I'm trying to remember. A lot of it was from C.S. Lewis. I do enjoy Lewis. I'll say like he's like one of the best examples of Protestant teaching. I think he was a Protestant at least, but just like he never really spoke much about the church or any of the. He extended out the non-liturgical aspects of the faith in like the best way you can, I believe, through philosophizing on it and all of that stuff. Like Mere Christianity is a very good book. I would recommend it to almost anybody who is questioning Christianity or curious, trying to inquire into it. It's a very good starting point. But in terms of like, what's his name? John something. He's like an old English guy from, I think, Oxford. He comes from the teachings of C.S. Lewis. But he was the guy who's kind of like talking about how he's a mathematician. He's talking about how like science and faith don't contradict each other and how they can kind of go along with each other. Since then, I've kind of become more of a young creationist, young earth creationist type person. So a lot of that is kind of fleeting my mind. I'm not like a flat earther or anything like that, but a lot of that science, and it's good for early on. It's good whenever you're first stepping into this. But I just wanted to come on here and really just kind of yap for a little bit, but explain how beautiful this faith is in the best way that I could, and in terms that hopefully to people my age will kind of understand. I mean, you cannot. I have a buddy who me and him used to do a podcast together. And we got up to like 20 episodes where we would just talk about all that Rick Rubin stuff and music and creativity and the mysteries of it. Very easily explained within the Catholic faith of Holy Spirit, divine inspiration, and demonic inspiration, and how those kind of things teeter on each other, and the whole idea of spiritual warfare as a whole. But we would get on there and just yap about this stuff, not really knowing anything at all. And he got sucked into that hermetic, I guess it'd be like perennialism. He's kind of just like a rejecter of the faith. Even now, he believes that he got it all figured out, and the stuff he would send me that convinced him was like TikTok videos of like, almost like schizo posts, where it's like, this word means this, blah, 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 blah. Have you seen what the word dog means? We reinverted it, it's God, bro. Devil, evil, good, God, you get these words. It was like that level of content, as well as like the very, very new age kundalini thing of like the serpent and the spine and all this symbolism and stuff, which I feel is the stuff that's like convincing a lot of people nowadays, which is one of the reasons why I came on here, because it almost got me for a while where I was very interested in it. I was just consuming all this stuff, Carl Jung. I was like taking it because it was so interesting to me at the time, and I had never been exposed to that complex of ideas because I'm pretty young. I'm only 22, and at this time I was probably like 20, 21 when I first started getting into this stuff. That it was like when your first exposure to complex ideas is right in front of you and it's very mystical like this and points to something beyond the material, and it kind of does lead you out of nihilism to a point. A lot of it ends up being very circular when you apply logic and you start applying these different philosophical attributes to it. It kind of becomes circular and nonsensical, really, when you look at it. But it's very interesting at the time, and I can see how it sucks a lot of people in. But I do kind of mourn over the amount of people who are being led astray by things like 60-second TikTok videos on some esoteric theory. And again, most people saw how easily this was disproven by that like Billy Carson debate with, what was his name, Wes Huff a while back. I mean, and I don't necessarily agree with a lot of Wes Huff's beliefs. He's a Protestant, and but he does have a lot of knowledge on the history of like the text itself. That's his whole domain. So whenever you get someone like that on there with someone like Billy Carson or whatever, and he just destroys him and just makes him look like a fool without even really being mean or anything, to the point where Billy Carson like ruins friendships and like cries on camera for how he was like ambushed, just crazy stuff. It really makes you put into perspective like the depths of the religion. It really does. So anyway, that's all I'm going to leave you with. Probably most of my videos over the next, I might start doing regular videos if I feel up to it. But most of my videos in the future are going to be about this, diving deeper. Again, I don't want to talk too much about doctrine and concrete positions that we should be in as Catholics, because I am green. I have not been confirmed yet at all. But I do have a burning desire to try to share the fullness of the faith, if you will, the depths that can be dissented into if you have interest in that sort of thing. One last thing. At the end of this video, I kind of just argued kind of how I found how deep Christianity can be, and like the true vastness of it in a good way. But I didn't really argue why Christianity over other things. I kind of dabbled a little bit with like the New Age stuff, but overall, this isn't going to be any sort of a scholarly opinion or anything, but just simply put, the two main reasons that I like Christianity is out of all the other ones that I sourced and went through, it seemed to be like the most full in terms of like the ethics, and the most concrete and sound in terms of like when you apply a lot of these people that you watch that pick apart different religions and worldviews, they apply what they call the laws of logic to it. And when you apply that to something like Christianity versus something like, let's say, atheism, or something like I'm just trying to think of one, or Buddhism or something like that, Christianity comes to be, from what I've seen at least, one of the most non-circular worldviews out of these. And whenever it comes to like ethics, history, and for me, one of the biggest things, I know I'm making this after part of the video because I know it won't satisfy a lot of people. I just mean, it's really full. It's got a lot of lore. It's got a lot of stuff behind it. It's really cool, dude. But I know that won't satisfy a lot of people. But for me, and where I was at in my experience, that was like the main thing holding me back, is I thought it was like kind of cringe. It was for like moms. It was just like, I don't know, I just didn't really understand how, one, intellectual, and two, not trying to say that I'm like smart or anything, but I kind of crave that aspect of things, and two, how just interesting it was. Like, I grew up with the stories of Christ, not reading them for myself, but just hearing them in like mega churches and Baptist churches and stuff like that, and I understood what Christmas was, all of that sort of thing, but I didn't truly understand how, one, interconnected this book is in between all of it, like the typology of going to the old and the new. You start seeing, like, one of the things was, for me, Mary, right? Mother Mary. How can we venerate her so much? How can she be This is a big argument, but like sinless or any of these things. But just this is one brief example. So in the Old Testament, right, you have something called a tabernacle, which God gives instructions to Moses to build this tabernacle. It's like, I started reading this, and I got to the book of Exodus, and I'm just like, I watched all these movies, and this is like a 4-hour movie of Moses and freeing his people from Egypt and Pharaoh and all this stuff. Bro, this is like a couple of chapters, and then the rest is just building instructions. It was very hard read, but nonetheless, you have this tabernacle where, and I don't want to butcher this, but it has 2 major rooms within it. So the main room is just kind of like the main space within the tabernacle, and then you have the Holy of Holies, I think that's what it is, but it's like this room in the back where the priests, which were became from the tribe of Levi, appointed, they could only enter into it once a year at the risk of their own life, right? They would tie a rope around their ankle because the people outside couldn't go in and retrieve the dead body if they died. And the reason is because God has explained through Christianity the ultimate goodness, the pure holiness, something in that we can't really, that we're all trying to strive for, right? And to go into these things, you have all these rituals and stuff that God instituted to his people to be able to go back into this back part of the tabernacle and be within God, where God dwelt, basically. And you have all these purification rituals for the priest to become as pure as possible. So that's one example in the Old Testament. Try not to make this super long. Then you get into the New Testament where you have Mary. Now, to Catholics, for the most part, I think this is what they mostly believe, is that Mary is like the new Ark of the Covenant. She is basically bearing God inside her like the tabernacle, if you will. And one of the examples, the arguments of the Christian faith, or the Catholic faith, is that she had to remain sinless to bear God inside of her. She had to be pure. Again, remember, if you went into the tabernacle, so that's just, I'm not going to keep going and going and going with the typology, because that's not what this is. But that's just one out of millions of examples of just how deep and interconnected it goes. So those are my reasons for choosing Christianity and believing, if you will. Now, to get to all the other religions, I'm not going to go through every single religion there is. But let me just very simply and surface level and in a very simple way go through these, okay, without making it super complicated. Let's take something like Buddhism, which is very much, it's even promoted by atheists now. You get people like Sam Harris, and all these people are basically like Buddhists now somehow. They call themselves atheists, but they're talking about meditation and all these things and therapy, and Catholic Church been doing that forever. You got confession, you got prayer, you got all these things. Much more powerful version of the secular version. But let's take something like Buddhism. I think basically, from what I've read, their worldview is kind of like that everything's an illusion, right? The Buddha or whatever came to this consensus through like seeing things. He's like, oh, everything must be an illusion, and then you get all these ideas of reincarnation and blah, 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 blah. Now, if I'm an atheist, and, well, let's just lay out a couple more to make it fair. Then you get something like Hinduism, where you have all these gods and all this stuff and blah, 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 and everything. From what I believe, their worldview isn't that it's an illusion. It's more that the world is kind of just a spiritual experience. Again, the Christians believe in a body, physicality, and a soul the spiritual element of things. And Buddhists, they don't believe in that at all. They just believe it's an illusion. Hindus kind of believe that they don't really align too much with that body physicality part. And then you have thousands of different isms and ists, blah, 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 terms that people use that branch off those ideas that were inspired by these ancient religions, if you will. But anyway, they focus more on the, what was I trying to say? They focus more on the spirit side of things, and you have all this stuff and all these blah, 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 and Indian food tastes pretty good, in my opinion, blah, blah, blah. You have all of that. And then you have, let's just do a more modern, something newer, something like Islam. Now, I've researched a good amount on Islam. Whenever I was big into the self-improvement space, back whenever I was kind of retarded, I saw Andrew Tate's conversion, and I got very interested in it because I kind of, before I understood things a little bit more clearly in terms of like ethics and right and wrong, and I kind of aligned with a lot of what Andrew Tate said. This was probably like around 2022-ish, whenever he blew up or whatever. I was still like a little spurg and stuff like that, and I didn't really have any sort of skills or purpose, and I attached to what a lot he said. So I went into Islam a little bit. I never like called myself a revert or anything. I still thought it was pretty cringe, but I was interested in it. But through learning a lot about it, it was just so silly. Like the first thing I found is these people have like a giant contradiction where their Quran literally says follow the Gospels and follow the Torah, and then whenever they're arguing with anybody, they're basically just like literal scholars in thousands of years of tradition before their religion even existed, before their illiterate prophet even existed, proved the essence of the Trinity against things like Arianism, different heresies like that. So you have all of this, right? You have this conglomerate of, or you just have this tightly knitted idea of what the Trinity is. And they try to come along and pick it apart in the Bible. And then whenever you disprove them, which is very easily done, because it has so much history of being done, they're like, oh no, those books don't make sense. So they just have this giant contradiction where they follow them and they try to pick them apart, and their whole religion's based upon them, and then they basically just throw that away and say, oh no, it's corrupted, written by man. And there was like 12 people who put together the written form of the Quran, 12 different versions from different people that knew Muhammad, and they picked lots of corruption within that itself. And their whole religion is based upon this incorruptibility of their text. And it's just kind of very silly. And then you get into the ethics of Islam, and when you see things like Andrew Tate as a young man who's trying to be masculine, trying to discover things outside of the domain of video games and other childish endeavors, you see these things, and it's just like very appealing, and you see all these rich people going to Dubai and all this stuff. But when you peel back the layers of the onion, especially of Islam, it's very, very easily pulled apart, and it's been pulled apart by many people. And then you get to the things where it's like Aisha and the 9-year-old, and a funny joke I heard, if there's any Muslims watching this shit, they're probably going to hate this. But I saw a funny joke the other day where it was like, Muslims say it's haram to eat pork, but halal to pork a 9-year-old girl. That's crazy, I know. But Islam, it just ain't it. It very weird, lots of bad things surrounding it. I guess this isn't going to be anywhere near enough to convince any Muslims to steer away from their faith, but there's plenty of resources out there to prove against it. And to me personally, I feel like the cringiest thing nowadays is not being an atheist, not being a Buddhist, not being some sort of New Age. The cringier the New Age spirituality is like a 20-year-old white Caucasian revert to Islam. It just feels like he's been like abducted from his hometown, or like, say this was like put back in the Middle Ages. It's like some like young teen was abducted from his town before knowing anything and just like forced into this foreign religion. That's what it just looks like. Just a lack of going deep enough. So there's that. But let's get back to the whole other thing. Let's say you're an atheist, if you will, right? And you're picking between three different things and all their infinite versions. You have Christianity, Islam, or Hinduism, and Buddhism. And let's just throw philosophy in there. Like, you got all the 19th century philosophers all the way back to like Plato, Aristotle, and even Plotinus. Let's throw them in there. So you have all this different stuff, right? When you're looking as an atheist, you're kind of in a unique position, or even an agnostic, if you will. And agnosticism is very non-logical, because if you get to the very bottom of the logic in terms of agnosticism, if you don't know anything, then we can't know anything at all. That means that there's no truths whatsoever. And you can pick and choose with your agnosticism and be a very simple-minded person and say, oh, well, I'm not agnostic about these things that are proven and known, but like the spirituality and the elements like that, it is. Bro, you just have not read enough. There are so many things going against agnosticism in terms of its logic that I would say the best thing for agnostics is to, instead of trying to research a religion, like I would definitely promote Christianity to them, to go and study the laws of logic, study metaphysics, study certain things like epistemology, study these things and understand these concepts. Because most agnostics are not even agnostic nowadays. They're literally just like new age, esoteric, into all this different stuff. They're just perennialists. They just combined different things. That's basically the agnostics nowadays. Most of them are not like mostly atheists, but with the inkling of God. So I would say agnosticism is probably like one of the second quickest routes to despair, bar atheism. So let's say you're an atheist shopping in the candy store of religion. You got Buddhism, Hinduism, Christian, all these things. Philosophy. Most atheists already are just like research the philosophers and they think that's sufficient enough. But you have all this different stuff. Why Christianity? Well, for me at least, Buddhism is, you got reincarnation, you got this idea of things as an illusion, you have this idea of the one, the universe. It's very, a lot of the stuff whenever I was into it, not into it as in like believed in it, but like researching and getting interested into finding out what they think, it's just like mainly this idea of we're all the universe, we're all just one. A lot of New Age borrows from Buddhism for the most part, and a lot of atheism does too. But it's a very circular theory. It doesn't make a lot of sense. And again, I'm not going to try to get too scholarly on here and start using all these different methods of pulling it apart, but just ask that simple question to the layman who doesn't really give much thought to any of these things, not some academic atheist, but just truly ask yourself, is it better for you to believe in, if you're going to believe in something that you don't think is truthful, like you're going to go down the path of trying to convince yourself of something, taking that leap of faith into something? What's better? Thousands of gods and craziness and Bhagavad Gita and soul is the main thing that matters and all of this. It's very hard because a lot of these things teeter on, one, an Asian perspective, an Eastern perspective, especially if you're in the West, you're an American or European. It's kind of hard to identify with a lot of these things, even in Buddhism, unless you westernize it as they have with the meditation and all of this, business people meditating and stuff like that as their 20-minute spirituality in the day. Crazy. Or aligning with the thing that's been around for 2,000 years, Christianity, and has just blossomed into one of the most beautiful Western traditions. You have things like Christendom, which the Enlightenment, the atheists, try to call it the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages. They try to completely psyop the whole thing like there wasn't anything. But you start getting into people like Aquinas, and a lot of that, you start reading things like the Divine Comedy, or I know he's kind of more of a Protestant, but even Milton's Paradise Lost, beautiful things. I kind of align more with the Divine Comedy than Paradise Lost, but just like very full and with a lot of depth in history, and you look into the architecture of cathedrals and just all of it. It's beautiful. So you have that as a choice as well. I know what I'm picking. And then let's say you're an atheist and you're like, well, I can kind of see that that's the best thing to pick, but I'm still kind of struggling. Bro, why would you choose to view this life as a video game that just turns off at the end? What's the point of doing anything? You might as well. I remember I used to play World of Warcraft, and they had these things called classic servers. They were separate from the actual game, and they were on different websites, and every once in a while, the real owners of the game would come and shut them down. Well, people would play these things and stuff and spend countless hours on these things just for them to get it shut down. What was the point of doing anything? That's like being an atheist, when you could have the fullness of the game that has, I know this is a weird analogy, but has a whole past history and all sorts of stuff within it, as well as the present, as well as the community within it. Why would you choose, if nothing matters and you just die anyways, and you're gonna have to fight that idea? Why choose that when you can choose this? If you're playing some game that turns off at the end, but there's this beautiful choice within the middle of the game to choose something to make the experience better, but your only contention to it is, I don't know, I gotta keep my I gotta be a skeptic and keep this, and that makes me feel smart and blah blah blah, and I don't know what truth is and all that. Bro, there's countless apologetics that you can read that can give you truth if you go deep enough. That was what this whole video is about. I've rambled on long enough, my boy. Peace out.